that really does get to the book, right? So like, let's jump in. I think we talked about a little bit about your first sentence.
Yeah.
And I think this really correlates in some ways to what you just said. So I think it's a good time to pivot and think about like, so the first sentence in the book, Matt, is a good one. You say, so aside from the quote from Tolkien up at the start, the first sentence is, we all have to pick a story to help us make sense of the world. And so I guess my question is, do we have to? Do I have to have a story that makes me able to sort of just go day by day through this world and live it out? Or can I just kind of take things one at a time? Like why do we have to have a story?
Yeah, I love that you asked that question. And it makes me even think about that first sentence, right? We've talked about this before. And I think directly here, choosing a story, I think, is part of the ownership piece. It's this growing up into, here's what I believe, and no, now here's why I believe it. And then it's realizing, wait, I'm choosing what I believe. Or if I'm not aware that I'm choosing, then I think that's part of why we have a book on philosophy and worldview, is to help people realize you can choose. But I think there's something to be said, is maybe it's, we all have to choose a story to make sense out of the world. We're all choosing a story to make sense out of the world. Like, that is what's happening. And I think if you say, well, do I have to pick a story? Well, everything is a story. We love stories. We're in a story. I've said this before too, like, what's not a story that you would choose? What's the alternative to choosing a story? Is there something that's not a story to make sense out of the world?
Yeah. I'm going to hold on that question. We're going to come back to that one.
All right.
But I do love it. And I think, so in part you're saying, like, it's part of just growing up and spiritually growing up. Sorry,
both.
Not stopping, not in a pejorative way, but they just making a choice. So first of all, I think what I love about your thinking and what's helped me with your thinking in your book is, like, it seems like it's really about a lot of that. A lot of, you have choices.
Yes.
You're either making them consciously. I think, at the beginning you say you have like 4 categories, and I also really like that. What is it? Furthermore, as we trust these various stories transmitted from generation to generation, creatively invented or adapted, unconsciously consumed or intentionally adopted. I'm like, yeah, you either inherit it and you just accept it, or you kind of inherit it and you get a little creative with it. You think about it in your own ways. But like, ultimately, that last one, I think, is what you're pointing towards, which is like, can you intentionally adopt a story versus subconsciously? And so it's really, ultimately, it's about awareness. And I love that push towards awareness, and I love that push towards choice. It makes us, both of those make us more powerful.
Yeah. Well, and that's where I think we're going to start getting some ownership as well.
Yeah.
But I also think something like this too, when we think about story, the story that we're choosing is how we're filtering the world. Like, we've talked about this a whole bunch. And so I think there's like you had said, there's an empowering notion to this, that what I've decided to use to figure out each day and all the decisions I'm making throughout the day, but also how to filter, how I'm filtering and interpreting the world around me. If you're not aware of the fact that you've accepted a story that's causing you to interpret things a certain way, that's I think, actually one of the most powerful things about philosophy and worldview. I'm out.
Hey, they like that point. It sounds like they're like, hey, good point, Matt.
But like, I think one thing to frame it here You know what we'll do? We'll use Star Wars as an example, right? And Luke's getting trained by Obi-Wan. They're on the Millennium Falcon, and it's some of his first training, right? And he puts the face shield over, and Luke's like, well, you know, you're trusting too much in your senses. You got to feel the force, right? And so
Yeah.
Luke blocks lasers coming at him that he can't see. The only way that's going to happen is it's supernatural, right? He's connecting with the force, and he pulls the face shield up, and he's excited. And then I love this because at the time, Han Solo walks right in, and Han's response was, "I call it luck, right? There's nothing governing
Yeah.
my life." And at that time, for Han Solo, his filter, there's no force, and so when someone blocks lasers that they can't see, his story that he's adopted, the force isn't real, there's nobody controlling my life, causes him to interpret that what he just saw in that way. And so
Yeah.
I have so many people who tell me, well, I'll believe in God when I see a miracle. And part of what this book is going to help you understand is that if you have adopted a story that doesn't allow for miracles and
Yeah.
doesn't allow for a God who intervenes in our world, when you see a miracle, you're going to use what you've trusted, the story you've trusted, to filter out what you're experiencing.
Yeah.
Now,
Yes.
sometimes people are like, oh, well, I was hoping this would be true, and now this is confirming it. So there's a balance there. And yes, miracles can wake us up and all those types of things. But there is also a sense that you're going to use your story, the one that you've trusted, to interpret everything around you. And if you're not empowered to be able to change that,
Yeah.
and then we're just all we're jellyfish floating around here. Like I have another one I could share, but I want to give you a chance to respond to that.
Well, I think again, I know a little bit, having read the book and been around you as you teach this. I know a little bit of how you balance that out, right? Because the other point could be made is like, look, if you have a worldview where
Yeah.
where you where you believe in miracles, you may also see miracles where they're not.
Yes.
You may,
Yeah.
or you may wait on a miracle in a moment where you really just need to get your act together and do what, so like so what I appreciate about what you're saying is to not start with the get your act together, but to start with, listen, if you're
Yeah.
if you're going to say I am a follower of Jesus, you have to do something with these stories.
Yeah. Yes.
And so let's let that be the starting point.
Yeah.
What are you going to do with those stories? And there's all kinds of things that people do with them. I grew up with dispensationalism, so that's in my mind a one way in which someone talks about this. But like ultimately, they're there. You have to come at them with a lens. I think. So, anyways, we'll talk more, and it makes me actually think like maybe. So we dipped into the page one, but maybe we need to go back to the cover next time, because I think what So two things, like you've got these words on the cover that mean a lot, right? So philosophy is a word that's on there. Worldview is a word. We're starting to dip into what we mean by a worldview, and then I actually was intrigued. So you talk about truth and reality, which are big words.
Yeah.
And but then I also like there's this semi-soft word. It's like semi-soft language on the cover, Matt. I want to come back and talk to you another day. You see a way of learning about our connections.
Yes.
To those. And I'm like, okay, softy, connections. You can't, anyways. So we'll come back to that another day. But so it does seem as if we've kind of landed on what you mean by a worldview. Yeah. Like a worldview is the lens, which in this case you're also seemingly correspondingly using the word story.
Yeah.
It's the story that we have chosen to believe in, either consciously or subconsciously, that affects how we see a circumstance.
Well, and let me speak into that kind of. Yeah. I really want to wrap it up. So what you've just said, I think, is illustrated so well in a story, which is in the biblical story. And it's actually the story I used to start my classes. And so why don't I just throw that in there? Could I take a couple minutes right now and
Yeah,
just
do it.
explain it? Because I think it'll layer out everything. And even like what you just said about you growing up, or even for myself growing up, not really, you know, living out this authentic discipleship of really like this supernatural reality. In 2 Kings chapter 6, you've got Elisha, who's a prophet of God, right, who hears God's voice and shares it with the people. And right before this scene, an iron axe head fell in a river or whatever in some water, and he prays, and an iron axe head floats up to the surface of the water. So we're already in crazy, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's crazy sauce if you're reading that in the book and you're like, iron floating on water. To trust this biblical narrative as true takes some type of lens here. It takes a step. So in the story, though, that I share, Elisha is the Aramean army is coming to get the Israelite army, and Elisha is hearing from God about their plans, and so they're playing cat and mouse, right? And the Aramean leader is all like, who's the snitch? Who's telling us? Because they're like dodging us, right? And they say to him, hey, no, king, Elisha's hearing God's voice in his, he's hearing God's voice and he's telling the Israelites what, all your plans are, right? And which that's a whole another conversation.
Yeah.
Not still do that.
Yeah.
But so then they find out that Elisha and his servant Gehazi are in Dothan. And so the Arameans send an army to surround this city, right? And so here's where it comes. Elisha's got this little helper. I call him the TA, right? He's seen signs and wonders and miracles. He believes in Yahweh. He's following, come on, he's following Elisha. So is he in? Does he believe in God? Yes. And he believes in signs and wonders and miracles. So ready? But check this out. In this scene, Elisha and Gehazi wake up and Elisha's fine. I kind of picture him. He's got his breakfast or whatever, and he's doing okay. He's looking around, and his servant's right next to him, right? And he's freaking out, and he's going, oh, my Lord, what shall we do? Right? One of my students just walked by, who's probably heard this lesson. Look at
that. He's like,
he's laughing about it. And the servant's like, oh, my Lord, what shall we do? Because he sees the physical army that has surrounded the city to get both of them. So physical reality, he sees it, and look what's happening. It's causing anxiety.
Yeah.
So it's affecting him in that moment. Now, 6 feet away, although in 2020 they'd be 6 feet away, right? Elisha's standing right next to him, and he's totally fine. Worldview, same scene, worldview. And Elisha's like, oh, hey, he's going to say a little prayer. Oh, Lord, open his eyes so he can see. Now, if you really catch the prayer, the guy's eyes are already open. He sees the army. So it's, oh, Lord, open his already open eyes so he can see what's really going on. God opens his eyes, and Elisha did not pray, send your army to rescue us, or lift us out of here and take us away, or help me kill all the bad guys. It's just open his eyes. Talk about world view. God opens the guy's eyes, and he sees behind the physical army, God's angel army with horses and chariots of fire surrounding them. What changed was the guy's worldview. And I think what's important here is it's not like this is some atheist who's now like, oh, there it is. This is the guy who's serving God's prophet. Like he's already in, and that woke me up.
He's in.
Like, I'm a Christian. I trust Jesus. I'm saved by grace. I'm sharing the good news. But I'm still could be missing something here. Oh Lord, open my eyes so I can really see. That's the Jesus. Like what's really going on, right? And that's Old Testament. And I think the way to frame it is that in order to believe that there's an angel army, what kind of worldview does that take? Just that. Is this book real or not? And is it the book that I'm in? If it's the book that I'm a part of, and it's the story that I'm a part of, that's important. Lewis says, I have a quote here I wanted to read. C.S. Lewis says, Christianity, if false, is of no importance. It's just another story, right? And this is a guy who was an atheist for over 15 years, hardcore atheist, right? Who
Yeah.
had chucked Christianity. So Christianity, if false, is of no importance. And if true, of infinite importance. The only thing it cannot be is moderately important.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's interesting. I was about to make a sarcastic comment. I'm gonna hold on to that. I'm not gonna. You're so positive, Matt. I don't know how to be around you. I think that's a great spot to end, to be honest with you, that quote and that story, because I think that can frame, to me, that makes a real pivot.
Yeah.
So what happened to, what was it, Gehazi? What was the guy?
Gehazi, I think it is, right?
Gehazi. I don't know. I should probably Google it between now and the next time. But the point, I think, I mean, obviously it's your story and you've done this a number of times, but what I think that does is set up a great pivot to talk about what we mean when we say reality.
Reality, yes. It sets that up. Yep.
Yeah.
Our connections to truth and reality. Is truth just an abstract concept? Or when Jesus says, I am the truth? Well, now we're having a connection to either a thought or a concept, or a connection to God and connection to reality. And what is reality? What's really real? Those are the big questions. That's what we want to figure out. What's really going on, right? We're trying to figure it out. We're all in this story.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love it. All right, I think this is a good spot to end it. I appreciate it, man. This is fun to talk about. I have a lot of questions. I mean, one question I'll plant. So all the way back to why you wrote the book is part of this, like in your ability, like Chesterton's ability to laugh about this stuff, to be in actual debates where you're actually showing up with cogent thoughts and proof points, and but also to not take it so seriously. And so I wonder, I'd love to hear your take on why it has gotten so serious.
That's a great question.
Why so serious? I mean, so because we don't know anything that he didn't know.
Yeah.
But yet we still do. And you were saying it took you 20 years to get here. I know you've been on this path and made a lot of progress. It's not like you, but why so serious?
Yeah.
Be an interesting topic to discuss. It's great.
That's actually part of why I wrote the book as well, right? Because when we realize that everything's based off of faith and trust, it levels the playing field.
Levels the playing field a bit.
Levels the play. We're all in this together, trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
And that takes a certain humility, but when you can embrace that humility and rest in it, then we can laugh our way through this, bumble along, trying to figure it out. We're all on the journey together. We're all trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that's back to so I think you and I have come to an agreement not to be too quotatious.
Yeah.
And obviously the Inklings are great to quote because that's the book, but there's one of my spiritual fathers talks about calmly held boundaries.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so they're not boundaries.
There's boundaries.
They're boundaries, but they're not, they're also calmly held. And I think that gets back to like maturity, I think, in some ways. But yeah, I think it'd be interesting to talk about like that. That sounds like it's down the road. It's an output of, like, in the frame of your book, it's probably it's a result of thinking this way. Would be the ability to hold it loosely, to recognize that it is faith, to recognize that we're all in the same boat. And I know you like the boat metaphor.
Well, look at the dudes who didn't hold their boundaries calmly in the stories of the Gospels, right? Because John the Baptist is like, you got to get ready to be able to change your mind. Because if you're not willing to change your mind and see things in a new way, well, the Gospels play themselves out there, right? We have to be willing. We have to be willing to change, right? And grow and learn and die to self every day, right?
That's fantastic. That's a good ending spot. I wanted to try and work on that today. I'm going to try and do that.
Me too.
I'm going to write that down. Anyways, thanks, Matt.
Thank you,
This
Jack.
is awesome.
This is so thanks for being willing to do it and carving out some time.
Yeah, I love it. It's to my benefit. So
Likewise.
sweet.
Cheers.
All right, I'm going to sign off,
Okay.
and I'll see you. We'll talk, we'll connect, and we'll see you in a week.
All right. Have a great day.
Yeah, you too. Bye.
Take care. Bye.